Hello everyone, my name is Gabby, and welcome back to another Dragon Ball Super review. This time reviewing episode 112. Universe 4's Mona attacks Caulifla and Kale, but Cabba gets in their way, explaining that they need to save their stamina. He gets overpowered by Mona and almost gets eliminated until Vegeta saves him. Vegeta reminds him of his promise to take him to planet Sadala and explains that when he wins, he'll use the Super Dragon Balls to bring the Saiyans in Universe 6 back. With his confidence restored, Cabba fights Mona again, and his resolve to protect the others causes him to unlock Super Saiyan 2. And he defeats his opponent. But then he's suddenly caught by Frieza, overpowered and eliminated. Meanwhile, a weakened Goku is being targeted by members of Universe 3, but is saved by Caulifla, who demands to fight him. So, what did I like about this episode? Well, first of all, I actually honestly really enjoyed Cabba in this episode. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not normally the biggest fan of Cabba. It's not like I hate him, it's just I feel like he really kind of exemplifies the sort of modern Dragon Ball mindset. Like the kind of like really sort of video gamey, sort of like Xenoverse, sort of Dragon Ball heroes, kind of like, oh, hey, you, random audience surrogate character, you get to be a Saiyan too, and you get to get all the Saiyan forms, all the Super Saiyan forms, and get mentored by all of your favorite characters. I mean, I kind of joke that Cabba has a lot of similarities to the rival character in Dragon Ball Fusions, even though he came after Cabba, but still. Because he's often so kind of passive and so kind of enamored with all the heroes, sometimes I feel like he's just kind of a sort of bad self-insert character, because he doesn't really have much personality of his own outside of that. But in this episode, it felt like they were trying to alleviate that, in that it did kind of feel like they were trying to sort of explore his personality and explore his character a little bit more. Like, he's more than just like some Saiyan who kind of really likes Vegeta. I mean, he's got his own sort of resolves, he's got his own sort of problems, he's got his own sort of relationships to some of the other Saiyans and his own sort of reasons for fighting, and I feel like they did kind of really explore and kind of explain those. Plus, this episode did feel like it was trying to give some kind of conclusion to his kind of story, allowing him to basically actually do something cool of his own accord that isn't necessarily related to like him being Vegeta's pupil or anything like that. He had his own enemy to fight this episode. The enemy was kind of specifically talking about his struggles and the things that he was worried about, and he basically goes and breaks his limits and gets his new form, and he defeats his own personal enemy. It's fun. Plus, we even got to see a bit of kind of character development for him, in that in his first fight against Vegeta, he initially tries to give up when he thinks that Vegeta's too strong for him, and then Vegeta basically tells him to not give up at all. But in this episode, where it looks like Frieza's pretty much got the upper hand on him, he still refuses to give up. So it's like, hey, very clear kind of contrast, very clear kind of character development. Cabba is growing as a person. It's nice. Speaking of episode 37, this episode was actually quite similar to episode 37, but like not in a kind of like, oh, we're just gonna like reuse the same kind of story beats without any sort of thought into them. More like it kind of felt like a sequel to that episode. In that episode 37 was kind of almost like about Cabba sort of learning about what Saiyan pride is, and then this episode is kind of like Vegeta sort of teaching him to embrace that Saiyan pride again, and kind of like, I guess you could say almost taking the Saiyan pride up to the next level in the same way that he took his Super Saiyan up to the next level. Plus, they even referenced some of the stuff that happened in episode 37, in particular Vegeta bringing up the promise that he was going to go and visit the Universe 6 Saiyan homeworld. Dragon Ball Super doesn't always do very specific continuity nods like that, but one thing I have noticed is when that does happen, it's usually by an episode written by Toshio, referencing an earlier episode written by Toshio. He is one of the episode writers for Dragon Ball Super. You might also know him because he's the one that's also on Twitter. I feel like I'm starting to kind of understand the way he writes specific episodes, which is kind of cool. Feel like I can kind of understand these episodes a bit more. Also, basically everything between like Goku and Vegeta and Frieza in this episode. I mean, obviously the big kind of interesting Vegeta character moment in this episode was Vegeta kind of explaining that if he wins, he's going to use the Super Dragon Balls to wish back all of the Universe 6 Saiyans. This idea that he is actually proud of the Saiyans, so that if they die, he would actually want to bring them back nowadays, even if he wouldn't necessarily want to do that a few years ago. And even Goku kind of agreeing and sort of appreciating that. Obviously, it's an interesting character moment, but I think the other thing I found really interesting was that Frieza was also explaining that he wants the Super Dragon Balls for himself, pretty much so he can control the gods, and he's pretty much going to try and stop the others from getting their wish. I've got to admit, this is a complication that I'm finding really legitimately interesting, because one of the biggest fears that I had about this arc was that it was going to end with just like Universe 7 wins, and then they use the Super Dragon Balls to wish back all the universes that got erased, so basically there were no consequences to anything. But at the very least, Frieza's presence here is going to tell us that it's not that easy. Even if they do win, Universe 7 do win, and they have the Super Dragon Balls there, Frieza, it seems like, is going to do everything in his power to make sure he gets his wish, and that means that the other universes aren't going to come back, and obviously that's kind of a bad thing, and it means that things aren't necessarily going to end neatly, kind of wrapped up in a little bow. So I do hope they explore that when that actually happens and we get to the end of the tournament. As for what I didn't like about this episode, well, one of the kind of unavoidable issues of having this episode kind of repeat a lot of the sort of same similar kind of story beats as episode 37 means that a lot of my issues that I initially had with episode 37 still kind of apply. And that is just kind of the way that Cabba got Super Saiyan 2. I don't think the problem is I don't think it makes any sense or it's just like inconsistent logic. I mean, like, Caulifla got Super Saiyan 2 really easily. It's like makes complete biological sense that Cabba could get Super Saiyan 2. But once again, it's kind of an issue I think, in fact, a lot of this arc has sort of been doing is that once again it just kind of feels like a character getting a new form feels less like a surprise and more like a kind of certainty. Like, basically just due to this nature of this tournament, it just feels like the moment that anybody gets pushed into a situation where they're not in control, like, at all, it just feels like they're going to just randomly unlock a new form, and then it's just like, then the tables get reversed and kind of all that kind of stuff. See, at least with Caulifla, it's not really presented as like, oh, Caulifla gets pushed and then she gets a new form. It feels more just like Caulifla's just finding all this stuff easy because nobody told her that going Super Saiyan was supposed to be difficult, so it's just kind of like, oh, you know, I can just do that. I think the thing that they're doing with Caulifla is kind of different to the things that they're doing with Kaba, where it feels like with Kaba, they are trying to do like big emotional moments that are kind of triggering him to get these new transformations. But the problem is they're not necessarily that big emotional moments. They're kind of just pretty small emotional moments, so they don't really feel like they have the same kind of like catharsis that would really kind of require a new form to be able to overcome it. So basically, that's kind of why I like Caulifla more than Cabba. Because with Caulifla, like, yeah, sure, she gets her forms really easily, but it feels like the way that she's written, it's very kind of self-aware of the fact that these forms are supposed to be really difficult, and she is getting them really easily, so they kind of use it for a kind of Goten and Trunks level, like, oh wow, I'm actually really amazed at how quickly you're doing this, and then she's just kind of like, well, I didn't know this was supposed to be difficult. Whereas with Cabba, it feels like they're constantly trying to give us dramatic moments to push him, to show us how he's getting these new forms and trying to justify them, but the problem is it feels like the justification just don't go far enough, and it just kind of left a little bit cheap in my opinion. And that was my controversial comment of the week. I feel like that's probably not going to be the last one. So as for next episode, Goku was going to be fighting Caulifla and also Kale, it seems. I don't really know why he's doing it or how this is going to end, but I am at the very least interested to see Goku and Caulifla's kind of chemistry. I feel like the two of them kind of bounced off each other really well, and I do feel like their relationship's honestly really interesting. Also, the fact that Kale is there. Obviously, I'm still not the biggest fan of Kale, but she was actually alright this episode, so hopefully next episode they will use her as a character and it will kind of make a bit more sense, hopefully, and they won't go overboard with the Broly references, hopefully. Toei, please, I understand you like Broly, but not everyone does, and please make Kale a character, okay? Goodbye, thank you. So that was Dragon Ball Super episode 112. Well, it was pretty much one of the best ways you could have done a Cabba episode, in that it was pretty much exactly episode 37 part 2. It pretty much used the foundations that we got of Cabba in the Universe 6 tournament and some of the relationships that he had with the characters in some of the kind of preparation for the tournament, and used all that stuff as kind of stepping grounds and kind of like a jumping off point to sort of give Cabba something else to do and kind of explore his relationships and his character, and even give him a new form and make him look really cool in the process. And it did that with really fun character writing and character moments for a lot of the characters, and kind of feeling like it wrapped everything to do with Cabba up in a nice little bow in the course of one episode. So I guess I've always been a little bit conflicted on the Universe 6 Saiyans. I mean, Caulifla I like, Cabba I think he's alright, although he's a little bit boring and generic on his own, and Kale I kind of think she can have a really interesting idea and concept, but the execution has been pretty bad so far. With one of the Saiyans out, we have Caulifla and Kale to basically hold up all of Universe 6 along with those Namekians, and I do wonder what they're going to do with those two. It feels like whatever the reason for having those characters there, I mean, you know, besides the Broly references, it feels like whatever the reason they're having them there is probably going to be confirmed within the next few episodes. So I hope that the closure that we get for Caulifla and Kale is going to be as good as the closure we got for Cabba this episode, because if that's the case, you know, I think I'm going to be really satisfied with how they treated those characters. So this is Gabby, signing out, and I'll see you all next week. Bye guys!